She spoke with the kind of calm that comes only from someone who has walked through fire and come out stronger. She reminded everyone that a bank was not just a place for transactions or profit. It was a place built on trust, and trust could only be maintained if every person, no matter who they were, was treated with dignity and respect. She talked about the real value of a customer not being measured by the clothes they wore, the cars they drove, or the balance in their accounts. She spoke about how true success for any institution wasn't found in the marble floors or the size of its vaults, but in the way it made people feel when they walked through its doors. Her voice never wavered. She didn't shout, didn't point fingers, didn't call for anger or revenge. Instead, she asked everyone to look inward, to ask themselves how many times they had made someone feel small without even realizing it. She asked them to consider how many opportunities for kindness they had let slip away because they were too busy judging by appearances. Olivia's words weren't lectures. They were reminders of something everyone already knew deep down but had perhaps forgotten somewhere along the way. They were a call back to humanity. She spoke about her own journey, not with pride or self-pity, but with honesty. She told them she had once been that little girl who stood outside stores where she wasn't welcome, who had watched her hard-working parents treated like they didn't belong. She told them how those memories had fueled her determination, how they had shaped the kind of leader she had become. And she told them how painful it was to realize that even after reaching the highest position in this bank, the prejudices she had fought so hard against were still alive within its walls. But Olivia wasn't there just to share her pain. She was there to plant seeds of change. She made it clear that from that moment forward, things would be different. Discrimination, even in its quietest forms, would have no place in the institution she led. She promised that every employee, from the newest teller to the highest-ranking executive, would undergo comprehensive training on equity, respect, and empathy. She promised that there would be no more tolerance for subtle bias disguised as professionalism. And she made it clear that moving forward, every branch would be visited not just by customers in designer suits but by her personally, sometimes dressed just as she was today. The applause didn't start right away. For a long moment after she finished speaking, there was only silence. But it wasn't the heavy, uncomfortable silence from earlier. It was a silence of reflection, of realization. Then, slowly, one customer clapped. Then another. And another. Until the sound filled the vast lobby, rising up into the high ceilings and echoing off the marble walls. Some employees wiped tears from their eyes. Others bowed their heads, feeling the full weight of what had just been said. Olivia stood there for a moment longer, letting the emotion in the room wash over her. She wasn't seeking praise. She wasn't standing there for recognition. She was standing there for every customer who had ever been made to feel invisible, for every employee who needed to be reminded of the power of kindness. And as she stood there, surrounded by applause and renewed hope, she knew that while change would not happen overnight, it had begun in earnest. It had begun in their hearts. And it had begun today. In the days that followed the unforgettable morning at the Manhattan branch, Olivia Johnson wasted no time. She knew that real change couldn't just be a speech or a single emotional moment. It had to be built into the bones of the institution she led. If trust was to be truly restored, the bank needed more than apologies and promises. It needed action. It needed reform that touched every corner, from the marble floors of its flagship branches to the smallest local offices tucked away in quiet neighborhoods. Olivia met with the executive team that same afternoon, her voice steady and her vision clear. She laid out a bold plan that would reach every employee, no matter their title, seniority, or history. Mandatory ethics training was the first step. Not the kind of lifeless, check-the-box sessions that employees slept through and quickly forgot, but real, immersive programs focused on empathy, equity, and recognizing unconscious bias. Olivia brought in experts from outside the banking world, people who understood what it meant to build cultures rooted in dignity and respect. No one, not even the top executives, was exempt. Olivia herself was the first to sign up for the training, leading by example. She knew that culture changed from the top down, and if she expected her employees to open their hearts and minds, she had to show them how it was done. The reforms didn't stop there. Olivia initiated surprise inspections across all branches. She occasionally disguised herself again, just as she had that day, showing up unannounced to see how customers were truly treated when no one thought the CEO was watching. Word spread quickly among employees that the leader they once viewed from a distance was now standing in their lobbies, wearing simple clothes, asking simple questions, quietly observing not just procedures but attitudes. It wasn't fear Olivia wanted to create. It was awareness. A new sense that every customer, every interaction, mattered. Not because someone might be secretly powerful, but because every person deserved kindness as a basic right. The impact was immediate and profound. Stories started pouring in from branches all across the network. Customers who had once dreaded stepping into the bank because they felt judged or unwelcome now described warm greetings, patient help, and genuine smiles. Employees who had once kept their heads down and followed bad examples now felt empowered to speak up, to advocate for fairness, and to hold one another accountable. Slowly but surely, the bank's reputation began to shift. It wasn't just known as a place for the wealthy or the privileged. It became known as a place where everyone, every hard-working parent, every retired veteran, every young student, was treated like they mattered. Beyond the walls of the bank, the story of Olivia's stand spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story. Community leaders praised the move. Social media buzzed with support, admiration, and hope. Other businesses began to take notice, and a few even reached out to Olivia for advice on how to initiate similar reforms in their own organizations. Olivia accepted these opportunities gladly, believing that her mission wasn't just to change one bank but to spark a broader shift in the way people thought about power, privilege, and respect. Meanwhile, Richard Adams, the former branch manager who had once dismissed Olivia with such arrogance, issued a public apology. It was heartfelt and raw. In his statement, he acknowledged the deep biases he had carried for years, often without even recognizing them. He spoke about how the experience had shattered his assumptions and forced him to confront truths about himself that he had long ignored. His words didn't erase the harm he had caused, but they offered a powerful reminder that even those who fall can choose to rise again through humility and change. As for Emily Brooks, her suspension eventually turned into an opportunity for redemption. Through months of training, counseling, and hard personal work, she began to rebuild herself, not as the polished, judgmental employee she once was, but as someone more empathetic, more human. Olivia believed in second chances, not because it was easy but because real change demanded it. Standing in her office one quiet evening, looking out over the Manhattan skyline, Olivia reflected on everything that had happened. It would have been so simple that day to walk away, to let the ignorance and cruelty of others roll off her back. But she hadn't. She had stayed, she had fought, and because of that, thousands of lives had been touched, and a powerful message had been sent to anyone willing to listen. Respect wasn't a luxury. It was a right. And it was time for everyone, everywhere, to act like it. The story of Olivia Johnson reminds us that true dignity lies not in appearances, titles, or wealth, but in how we treat others, especially when no one is watching. It teaches that respect must never be conditional, and that a single act of empathy can ripple out to create lasting change. For those of us who have lived long enough to see how easy it is for the world to judge on the surface, Olivia's journey is a powerful reminder that character is built on kindness, humility, and the courage to confront injustice, even when it would be easier to walk away. Her story challenges each of us to reflect on our daily actions. Are we lifting others up or pushing them down without realizing it? Are we treating every person with the respect they deserve, regardless of their appearance? These lessons aren't just for younger generations. They are for all of us, especially those who have the experience to know how deeply small moments of kindness or cruelty can shape a life. Olivia's example shows that change starts not with grand speeches, but with small choices made every day. If we choose compassion, if we stand firm against bias, we leave behind a legacy that speaks louder than any words. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below sharing what lesson resonated with you most, and let us know what kinds of stories you'd love to see next. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful, real-life story that reminds us all of what truly matters. You are about to witness a true story that will shatter everything you thought you knew about success, prejudice, and dignity. What if the person you judged today was the one holding your future in their hands tomorrow could be your moment to stand for something greater? Watch until the end to uncover the powerful truth that shook an entire institution. Stay with us, hit that like button, and subscribe right now so you never miss stories that can change the way you see the world. On a bright morning in Manhattan, Olivia Johnson quietly made her way through the bustling streets, blending into the crowd with her old baseball cap pulled low over her forehead, a faded backpack slung across her shoulders, and worn-out sneakers that had clearly seen better days. To any passerby, she looked like just another ordinary woman going about her business, but as she approached the towering glass doors of one of the city's most prestigious banks, the contrast between her humble appearance and the gleaming marble floors inside couldn't have been more striking. The moment Olivia stepped through the entrance, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The cool air inside the building carried a sharpness that wasn't just from the air conditioning. It was the kind of cold that came from judgmental stares and unspoken assumptions. Bank employees dressed immaculately in designer suits and polished shoes glanced at her with quick, dismissive looks. A few customers turned their heads, their eyes scanning her from head to toe with barely concealed skepticism. Olivia adjusted her cap slightly, instinctively trying to shield herself from the flood of silent scrutiny as she made her way toward the ticket machine. Without a fuss, she took a number and found a seat in the waiting area. She settled in quietly, folding her hands in her lap and letting her gaze wander across the room. Everywhere she looked, there was a sharp contrast between wealth and appearances. Women in sleek dresses clicked across the marble floors in expensive heels. Men in tailored suits spoke into smartphones, barely glancing up from their conversations. And here sat Olivia, a small figure in the middle of this polished world, radiating an undeniable calm even as judgment weighed heavily in the air. A few seats away, a woman clutching a Louis Vuitton handbag pulled it closer to her body when Olivia sat down nearby. Her nose wrinkled ever so slightly, and she leaned over to whisper something to the man beside her. They both cast glances in Olivia's direction, their faces a mix of confusion and disapproval. Olivia caught the movement out of the corner of her eye but kept her focus steady on the ticket number in her hand. She knew what they were thinking. She had seen it all before. Near the main desk, a tall security guard with crossed arms kept his gaze fixed on her, his body language stiff and overly alert as if waiting for her to make some kind of suspicious move. Olivia offered him a polite nod, which he didn't return. At the counter, an employee named Emily Brooks noticed Olivia too. With her flawlessly curled blonde hair, expensive wristwatch glinting under the lights, and the air of someone who believed they could judge a book by its cover, Emily exchanged a smirk with a colleague. Their laughter was soft but unmistakably cruel, their eyes darting toward Olivia more than once. Olivia sat through it all in silence. She had come prepared for this exact kind of reception. Every mocking glance, every whisper, every assumption thrown her way was another stone in the wall they were unknowingly building around themselves. Olivia's calm demeanor never wavered. She didn't shrink from their eyes, nor did she rise to confront them. Instead, she let the silence build, allowing every judgmental look to reveal more about them than it ever could about her. She knew that the true weight of this day hadn't yet revealed itself. What they didn't know, and what they would soon learn, was that the woman they were looking down on so carelessly was not someone they could dismiss or belittle. Olivia Johnson was here for a reason far greater than they could imagine, and soon, everything they thought they knew would be turned upside down. As Olivia Johnson sat quietly in the waiting area, she let her eyes wander around the room, observing every detail. She wasn't just there to pass the time. She was paying close attention, noticing the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, ways people were treated differently based on how they looked. It didn't take long for the patterns to reveal themselves. Near the teller counters, an elderly black man, probably in his late 70s, stood nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot. His clothes were clean but old, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried to explain something to a young bank employee. The employee barely looked up from her computer, responding in clipped, impatient tones that made the man's confusion grow even more obvious. No one offered to help. No one showed a hint of kindness. It was as if the man's dignity didn't matter, as if he was invisible in this sparkling world of wealth and marble floors. Not far from him, a woman wearing a janitor's uniform approached the reception desk, holding a crumpled piece of paper and speaking in a soft, hesitant voice. She was clearly struggling with the automated number system. Instead of offering assistance, Emily Brooks, the employee with the expensive watch and dismissive smirk, waved her off with a sigh, telling her to figure it out herself. The janitor's face flushed with embarrassment as she mumbled an apology and stepped back, her hands shaking. Around them, polished customers continued their conversations without a glance, as if scenes like this were just normal, expected, and beneath their concern. Olivia felt a tightness in her chest as she watched. She clenched the small ticket in her hand a little harder but forced herself to stay calm. She was not surprised by what she was seeing, but it still hurt. No matter how much progress people claimed had been made, the casual cruelty in places like this still lingered, hiding behind smiles and polished surfaces. Olivia's attention was soon drawn to an older woman with snow-white hair standing awkwardly by the number machine. She was trying to press buttons but clearly didn't know how the touchscreen worked. Her hands fumbled and shook, and she looked around for help. None of the employees moved. No one even made eye contact with her. Without a second thought, Olivia stood up and walked over to her. She gently touched the woman's arm and offered a warm smile. With a few quick motions, Olivia helped her get a ticket and led her to an empty seat. The older woman smiled in gratitude, her eyes softening with relief, and Olivia returned to her own seat. She could feel eyes on her as she walked back. Emily Brooks whispered something snide to a colleague, just loud enough for Olivia to hear. The words stung, but Olivia kept her head high. She wasn't there to fight petty battles. She was there for something much bigger. As the minutes dragged on, Olivia continued to notice the pattern. Customers who fit the bank's unspoken image of wealth were greeted with smiles and attentive service. Those who didn't, particularly the black customers and working-class individuals, were treated with coldness, impatience, and at times open rudeness. It was a quiet but brutal kind of discrimination, one that left no physical bruises but deeply wounded the spirit. Olivia recognized the signs because she had lived through them herself. She remembered the days when her mother, after finishing long hours of janitorial work, would take her to banks where they were treated like second-class citizens. The faces of the employees might have changed, the technology might have advanced, but the attitudes remained painfully familiar. Sitting there, Olivia realized that the problem wasn't just about a few bad employees. It was something deeper, something systemic. It was a culture where people judged worth by clothes, skin color, and outward appearances. It was an environment where dignity could be stripped away with a glance, where kindness was rationed out only to those who looked like they belonged. Olivia's heart ached for the people she had watched being humiliated that morning. They deserved so much better. They deserved to be treated with respect, with the basic human decency that should be a given, not a luxury. As she sat silently with her ticket in hand, Olivia made herself a promise. What she had witnessed today would not be ignored. She would not simply leave the bank, shake her head in disappointment, and move on with her day. No, this was going to be the moment that sparked real change. She was done tolerating surface-level apologies and empty training sessions that changed nothing. Today, she would take a stand not just for herself but for every single person who had ever been made to feel small in a place where they should have been welcomed. Olivia knew the time was coming soon when she would reveal who she really was. And when that moment arrived, it would be more than just a personal vindication. It would be the first step toward tearing down the quiet, poisonous prejudices that had gone unchecked for far too long. As Olivia sat quietly in the waiting area, her fingers lightly tapping the ticket in her hand, her mind slowly drifted back to memories she thought she had long tucked away. Sitting in the heart of Manhattan's wealth and privilege, surrounded by marble floors and gold-plated counters, she could almost hear the echoes of her childhood in Harlem, a place so far removed from the luxury around her that it might as well have belonged to another world. Growing up, Olivia knew what it meant to go without. Her parents worked harder than anyone she knew but still struggled just to keep the lights on and food on the table. Her father, Samuel Johnson, was a construction worker, often coming home with his clothes soaked in sweat and dust from long days spent under the scorching sun or battling freezing winds. Yet no matter how hard those days were, he always walked through the door with a tired but genuine smile, bringing a sense of comfort to the tiny apartment they called home. Her mother, Patricia Johnson, cleaned office buildings at night, leaving early when the streets were still dark and coming back just before sunrise. Olivia remembered lying in bed under thin, patched blankets, listening to her mother's soft footsteps and the creak of the front door opening and closing. Those sounds were the lullabies of her youth. The apartment was small, the paint on the walls chipped and faded, the windows drafty enough that winters felt twice as cold inside as they did outside. Yet, it was a home filled with love, hope, and the constant reminder that even when the world outside was harsh and unforgiving, family was a refuge. What hurt more than the poverty was the way the world treated them because of it. Olivia could still feel the sting of being turned away from fancy stores where the clerks barely tried to hide their disdain. She remembered standing beside her mother at a bank counter, watching the teller speak to her with an icy tone, questioning her every word as if being poor made her a suspect rather than a customer. Olivia was just a little girl then, but even at that age, she understood the shame her mother tried so hard to hide behind a brave smile. One memory in particular clung to her heart like a scar that would never fully heal. It was her 8th birthday, and her father had saved up to buy her a simple dress. They walked into a clothing store, Samuel still in his work clothes, dust clinging to the creases of his jeans. The clerk looked them up and down with narrowed eyes before firmly stating they didn't serve people like them. No explanation, no apology. Just a door slammed shut in their faces. Olivia held back tears all the way home, clutching her father's rough, calloused hand, feeling his silent pain as deeply as her own. Those moments taught Olivia lessons no school could ever teach. She learned that dignity wasn't something given to you because of how you looked or what you wore. It was something you carried within yourself, no matter how much others tried to strip it away. She also learned that if she wanted the world to treat her differently, she would have to rise above every stereotype, every low expectation placed on her shoulders. It wasn't fair, but it was the reality she faced. So she worked harder than anyone else, studying under flickering streetlights when the power at home was cut off, borrowing worn library books when new ones were out of reach, pushing herself beyond exhaustion because she believed that knowledge and perseverance were the keys to freedom. Olivia's journey to success wasn't smooth or quick. There were setbacks that knocked her flat, betrayals that nearly crushed her spirit, and nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But through it all, she held onto the image of her parents' faces, their quiet strength, their unbreakable spirit. She carried them with her into every exam room, every job interview, every board meeting. They were her armor and her motivation. When she finally rose to become the CEO of one of the most prestigious banks in New York, it wasn't just her achievement. It was the triumph of every sacrifice her parents had made, every indignity they had endured without letting it destroy their hope. Sitting now in the bank, dressed in clothes that people around her dismissed as worthless, Olivia knew exactly what she was doing. She was honoring the promise she made to herself as an 8-year-old girl, crying quietly on a sidewalk in Harlem. She had sworn back then that she would never allow herself, or others like her, to be looked down upon again. And today, surrounded by cold stares and whispered judgments, she felt that same fire burning in her chest, reminding her why she had chosen this path and why she would not, stay silent. The quiet hum of the bank's waiting area was interrupted when the speaker finally called Olivia's number. She rose calmly from her seat and made her way to the counter where Emily Brooks sat, her polished nails tapping impatiently on the keyboard. Emily didn't even look up at first. She seemed to have already decided what kind of customer she was dealing with. Olivia, with her simple clothes and faded backpack, didn't fit the image of someone worthy of her time. When Olivia placed her ID and bank card on the counter and politely stated that she wished to withdraw $72,000 from her personal account, the mood at the counter shifted instantly. Emily paused, finally lifting her gaze to study Olivia's face with a mixture of confusion and barely concealed disdain. Emily repeated the amount as if she couldn't believe her own ears, her voice dripping with skepticism. Olivia confirmed it without hesitation, her tone steady, her expression calm. There was a brief, awkward silence before Emily took the ID and card with the tips of her fingers, as if afraid they might contaminate her manicured hands. She began typing Olivia's information into the system, her frown deepening with each click of the keyboard. When the account details loaded on the screen and confirmed not only the requested amount but a balance far higher than most customers could dream of, Emily's confusion turned into open suspicion. In her mind, there had to be a mistake. Someone dressed like Olivia could not possibly have access to that kind of wealth. Without saying much, Emily picked up the internal phone and called over her manager, Richard Adams. Olivia watched as Richard appeared from his office, his sharp gray suit and perfectly styled hair adding to the aura of authority he seemed to wear like armor. He approached the counter briskly, his eyes narrowing the moment he spotted Olivia. Without even greeting her, Richard leaned in and spoke to Emily in a low voice, though not so low that Olivia couldn't hear. He questioned the authenticity of the documents, the legitimacy of the account, and of course, the intentions of the woman standing quietly in front of them. Turning toward Olivia with a look of barely masked contempt, Richard addressed her with a kind of forced politeness that only thinly disguised his true feelings. He informed her that due to the size of the withdrawal and what he called unusual circumstances, they would need to verify the documents more thoroughly. Olivia nodded, showing no signs of anger. She expected this. She had lived through this kind of treatment her entire life. But as Richard spoke louder, making sure that nearby customers could hear his thinly veiled accusations, a small crowd began to form, drawn by the commotion. Richard didn't stop there. His suspicion turned into a full accusation as he loudly suggested that Olivia's documents could be fraudulent. He spoke with such confidence, such certainty, that customers around them began to whisper, their glances sharpening into judgmental stares. Some pulled out their phones to capture the scene, already drawing their own conclusions about the woman who didn't seem to belong. Olivia remained calm, though inside, her heart ached with the familiar sting of humiliation. She had worked her entire life to prove her worth, and yet here she was, once again being reduced to the clothes she wore and the color of her skin. Richard then suggested calling the police to deal with what he now labeled a suspected case of fraud. Emily smirked behind him, clearly feeling vindicated. Without even giving Olivia a real chance to defend herself, Richard ordered Emily to make the call. Olivia stood silently as Emily dialed, each beep of the numbers cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. Around her, the whispers grew louder, the judgment thicker. Some customers edged away, as if afraid to be associated with whatever crime they imagined she was committing. Others simply stared, their faces hard and cold, feeding off the spectacle unfolding before them. Despite everything, Olivia's face remained composed. She knew who she was. She knew the truth would come out soon enough. But standing there, feeling the weight of so many eyes filled with suspicion and disdain, she couldn't help but feel the old wounds being reopened. It wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been treated as less because of how they looked. Every person who had ever been made to feel invisible or criminal simply for daring to exist in spaces where others thought they didn't belong. As the sirens began to echo faintly from the street outside, growing louder with every passing second, Olivia closed her eyes for a brief moment and took a slow, steady breath. She wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. In just a few minutes, the entire room would see exactly who she was. And when that happened, the shame and embarrassment that Richard and Emily were trying so hard to pin on her would come crashing down on their own shoulders instead. The blaring sirens came to a stop right outside the bank's glass doors. Moments later, 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their faces set in a professional seriousness that only deepened the tension hanging over the entire branch. Every eye in the room followed them as they made their way toward the center of the commotion where Olivia stood, calm and quiet, while Richard Adams and Emily Brooks stood nearby, looking smug and self-assured. Richard quickly approached the officers, eager to take charge of the situation. He spoke in a loud, clear voice, making sure everyone within earshot could hear him accuse Olivia of attempting to commit fraud. He described her appearance, her suspicious request for a large withdrawal, and the supposed irregularities with her documents, presenting his version of the story as if it were already fact. One of the officers turned to Olivia, asking for her identification and an explanation. Olivia met his gaze without flinching. With a quiet steadiness, she handed over her ID and bank card, the same one she had offered earlier. She didn't argue or raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had learned long ago that the truth, when handled with patience and dignity, had a way of revealing itself more powerfully than any argument ever could. The officers stepped aside to verify her information, their radios crackling softly as they worked. Richard crossed his arms and exchanged satisfied glances with Emily, confident that he had done the right thing and that the truth would soon vindicate him. Around them, the gathered customers whispered among themselves, their glances toward Olivia still filled with doubt and judgment. Minutes passed, each second stretching out longer than the last. Then the officer holding Olivia's ID looked up, his expression shifting from cautious skepticism to something closer to disbelief. He exchanged a quick, loaded glance with his partner, then turned to Richard. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the murmurs in the room. He asked Richard once more if he was absolutely certain about the accusation he had made, emphasizing that a false accusation could have serious consequences. Richard, brimming with confidence, insisted there was no mistake. He gestured toward Olivia, dismissing her with a wave of his hand, still refusing to believe that anything she held could be legitimate. It was in that moment that Olivia decided it was time to speak. She pulled her phone from her backpack and, with slow, deliberate movements, unlocked the screen. Holding it out for the officers to see, she brought up her digital ID, complete with her official title and the seal of the bank's board of directors. The words under her photo were clear and undeniable: Olivia Johnson, Chief Executive Officer, Manhattan Trust Bank. The two officers leaned in to study the screen, their expressions hardening not toward Olivia, but toward Richard. A stunned silence fell over the room as word began to spread among the customers and staff who were craning their necks to see what was happening. Richard's face turned a shade paler with every passing second. His mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Emily, who had been standing proudly behind him, took an instinctive step backward, her confidence crumbling. Even the customers who had once stared at Olivia with suspicion now turned their gazes toward Richard, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something far colder. Olivia looked at Richard, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority as she spoke. She stated simply that she was the CEO of the very bank they were standing in and that she had come undercover to see firsthand how customers were treated when they didn't fit the mold of wealth and status. Every word hit Richard like a blow he hadn't seen coming. His posture, once so proud and commanding, sagged under the weight of realization. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the counter, her earlier smugness long gone. Around them, a wave of shame and discomfort rippled through the staff and customers alike. The truth had not only been revealed, it had exploded into the room, leaving no one untouched. Olivia stood there, calm and unshakable, not with the arrogance of someone seeking revenge, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had fought battles much harder than this and emerged stronger each time. The officers quickly apologized to Olivia, their respect for her clear in their words and actions. They turned back to Richard, now explaining that they would be making a formal report of the incident and that the bank would be responsible for whatever came next. Olivia didn't need to say much more. The truth had spoken louder than any accusation could. As she looked around the room, she could see it in the lowered heads, the shifting feet, the averted eyes. Change was coming, and it had started right here, in this moment, because she refused to let old prejudices go unchallenged. And this was just the beginning. The heavy silence inside the bank stretched on as Olivia Johnson calmly slipped her phone back into her pocket. Every eye was locked on her, and the weight of what had just happened hung thick in the air. Richard Adams stood frozen in place, his face drained of color, looking as if the ground had opened up beneath him. Emily Brooks, who had so confidently smirked and whispered earlier, now stared down at the floor, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her jacket. Olivia took a small step forward, her posture steady and unshakable. She knew she had the full attention of every person in that room. It was time to make it absolutely clear that actions had consequences. Without raising her voice, Olivia pulled out her phone once more and placed a video call to William Turner, the Director of Human Resources. Within seconds, William's serious face appeared on the screen. When he recognized Olivia standing inside the Manhattan branch, flanked by stunned employees and curious customers, his brows furrowed immediately. Olivia explained the situation in a clear and measured voice, making sure everyone nearby could hear her words. She laid out what had happened, how she had been treated, and how staff members had failed not only her but the bank's most essential values of respect and dignity. William listened carefully, nodding, and when Olivia finished, his voice came through the speaker with a firm, unwavering tone. He assured her that the necessary actions would be taken immediately. Olivia turned the phone slightly so that both Richard and Emily were clearly visible to William. Her eyes were steady, her voice carrying a calm authority that left no room for misunderstanding. She recommended that Richard Adams, as the branch manager, be terminated for gross misconduct and violation of the bank's ethical standards. The shock that flashed across Richard's face was raw and real. His mouth opened, searching for some excuse, some last desperate defense, but no words came out. Olivia had given him the chance to do better from the very beginning. He had chosen instead to double down on judgment and prejudice, and now the consequences were unavoidable. Olivia's gaze then shifted to Emily Brooks. Her voice softened slightly but stayed firm. She recommended that Emily be immediately suspended pending a full investigation into her behavior and her treatment of customers. Emily's hands shook visibly, and tears welled up in her eyes, but Olivia didn't waver. This wasn't about revenge or making someone cry. It was about holding people accountable for the harm they caused, whether they realized it or not. William Turner confirmed both decisions on the spot. He informed Olivia and everyone within earshot that documentation would be filed that very day and that interim leadership would be assigned to the branch immediately to ensure operations continued smoothly. The announcement seemed to ripple through the bank like a wave. Some employees looked stunned, others ashamed, and a few even relieved, as if they had long known things needed to change but never had the power or courage to make it happen themselves. Richard, for his part, stood stiffly for a few seconds longer before finally lowering his head. Without a word, he turned and walked away from the counter, the echo of his footsteps a stark contrast to the prideful way he had strutted across the floor earlier that morning. Emily remained rooted to the spot, wiping at her cheeks as she fought to pull herself together. Olivia watched them both with a heart that was heavy but certain. She knew it would have been easier to let it go, to walk out without forcing this confrontation, but that was not who she was. That was not why she had worked so hard to climb to the top. As the tension began to lift, customers who had once been whispering in suspicion now looked at Olivia with a mixture of awe and respect. The same people who had judged her by her clothes and skin color now saw her as the powerful leader she had always been, though she had never needed their validation. Olivia caught the eye of an elderly woman she had helped earlier, who offered her a small, trembling nod of gratitude. That tiny gesture, pure and unfiltered, meant more to Olivia than any of the stunned stares or hurried apologies floating through the room. What had happened today wasn't just about correcting one injustice. It was a declaration that prejudice, no matter how quietly it festered beneath the surface, would no longer be tolerated. Olivia knew this wasn't the end of the journey. It was only the beginning of the work ahead, but it was a beginning forged in truth, courage, and a promise kept to the little girl who once stood crying outside a store, vowing that one day things would be different. The weight of what had just happened still hung in the air as Olivia Johnson took a few slow steps toward the center of the lobby. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft shuffle of uneasy feet. Every set of eyes, from customers to employees, now rested on her, but the looks had changed. Suspicion and mockery had been replaced by something quieter, something heavier. Shame, regret, respect. Olivia took a deep breath and let her gaze sweep across the room. She didn't need a microphone. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone was enough to hold the attention of every soul inside that building.